My fiancée Clara dumped me in front of 200 people at our Halloween engagement party. She called me a project, a charity case her family was tired of funding. 1 year later, on the exact same night, I stood in the same ballroom and took everything from her. This is how I did it. The Davenport mansion was not a home. It was a statement. Marble floors stretched out like frozen lakes and crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings like captured stars. I never felt comfortable there. I was Leo, a graphic designer who found beauty in clean lines and simple fonts. The Davenports found beauty in price tags. Clara was my bridge between those two worlds. I loved her. I thought that was enough. Our relationship had been a whirlwind. We met at a gallery where she bought a small print I had designed. She was vibrant, funny, and seemed to see something in me that others did not. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Davenport, were less impressed. They saw my two-bedroom apartment, my reliable but unimpressive car, and my lack of a trust fund. I was a phase they tolerated. Mr. Davenport, a man built of steak dinners and smug condescension, often made jokes about my artistic temperament, which was his code for being poor. Clara always defended me. She would laugh off his comments, squeeze my hand under the dinner table, and whisper that she loved me for who I was. I believed her. I clung to that belief like a man overboard clings to a piece of driftwood. We got engaged 6 months into our relationship. I spent 3 months of my salary on a ring. It was a simple, elegant diamond on a white gold band. When I showed it to her, she cried and said yes. When she showed it to her mother, Mrs. Davenport inspected it and said, "It's a lovely starter ring, dear." The wedding planning was a battleground. My desire for a small, intimate ceremony was bulldozed by their insistence on a socially appropriate event. The guest list swelled with people I had never met. The budget escalated to a number that made my stomach churn. The one thing I thought we had agreed on, the one piece of me in this whole production, was the Halloween-themed engagement party. It was my favorite holiday. I loved the creativity, the transformation, the idea that you could be anything for one night. Clara seemed to love the idea too. She said it was unique and fun. Looking back, she probably just loved the opportunity to wear a very expensive costume. The night of the party was cold and clear, October 31st. The Davenport estate was transformed. Fake cobwebs draped over priceless statues. Animatronic ghouls lurked in the manicured gardens. A professional lighting crew had cast the entire mansion in shades of orange and purple. It was excessive. It was perfect for them. I was dressed as a classic vampire. It felt appropriate. I was a creature of the night, an outsider lurking in this palace of light and wealth. Clara was a fairy queen. Her costume was a cascade of silk and glitter, with wings that looked like they were spun from glass. She was breathtaking. She was also distant. All night, she flitted from one group of her parents' friends to another, introducing me with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I tried to stay close, but I was constantly pushed to the periphery. Mr. Davenport cornered me by the ice sculpture, which was a life-sized replica of a skeleton. He had a glass of scotch in his hand and a familiar smirk on his face. "Enjoying the show, Leo?" he asked, gesturing around the ballroom. "This is what real success looks like. It's a bit different from your print shops, I imagine." I just nodded. Arguing with him was like wrestling with a pig. You both get dirty, and the pig likes it. I found Clara near the string quartet, who were gamely playing a spooky version of a classical piece. I touched her arm. "Hey, can we talk for a second?" She pulled away slightly. "I'm busy, Leo. I'm hosting." Her voice was sharp. I saw her friends, a trio of women with identical hairstyles and expressions of bored disdain, watching us. One of them whispered something, and they all laughed. A cold dread began to pool in my gut. Something was wrong. The air was thick with it. The smiles were too bright. The laughter was too loud. It all felt like a performance, and I was the only one who did not know his lines. The moment arrived just after 10 o'clock. Mr. Davenport tapped a silver knife against his champagne flute. The music stopped. The chatter died down. 200 pairs of eyes turned towards the small stage at the end of the ballroom. "A toast," he boomed, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. To my beautiful daughter, Clara, and her fiancé, Leo. He said my name like it was a piece of food he had found in his drink. Clara joined him on stage, her fairy wings shimmering under the spotlights. I started to walk towards the stage, assuming I was meant to join them. Clara held up a hand, stopping me in my tracks. The gesture was small, but it was powerfully dismissive. I froze, halfway between my table and the stage. The crowd murmured. "Thank you, Daddy," Clara said into the microphone. Her voice was clear and steady. "I do have an announcement to make." She turned her head and looked directly at me. There was no love in her eyes, there was no warmth. There was only a cold, hard pity. "Leo and I will not be getting married." A collective gasp went through the room. My own breath caught in my throat. I could feel the blood draining from my face. This was not happening. It was a prank, a Halloween joke. "Leo has been a project," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "A fun little experiment in seeing if a man can be improved, if he can be polished up and made to fit into a world he was not born into." The laughter started then. It was scattered at first, then it grew louder as people realized this was not a joke. It was the evening's entertainment. But an experiment has to end. My family has been so generous and I've been so patient, but it's time to face reality. She looked at me, her face a mask of false sympathy. "You don't belong here, Leo. You never did." Then came the final, killing blow. She reached up, unclasped the simple diamond necklace I had given her for our 1-year anniversary. It was the most expensive thing I had ever bought. She held it up between her thumb and forefinger. "I think this will probably cover your rent for a few months," she said, and then she tossed it. It flew through the air in a glittering arc and landed on the floor a few feet in front of me. The sound of it hitting the marble was a tiny, insignificant clink, but to me it was as loud as a gunshot. The room erupted in laughter and applause. My project was over. I had been dismissed. I stood there, frozen, while 200 people in ridiculous costumes celebrated my destruction. I did not bend down to pick up the necklace. I just turned and walked away. The sound of their laughter following me out into the cold October night. The next 2 weeks were a blur of gray. I did not leave my apartment. I did not answer my phone. I let my work emails pile up, unanswered. The world outside my windows ceased to exist. My world had shrunk to the 4 walls of my living room, the crushing weight of humiliation, and the hollow ache in my chest where my heart used to be. My friend Ethan tried to get through. He left voicemails, he sent texts, he even came and pounded on my door for 10 minutes straight one afternoon. I hid in my bedroom, listening to his muffled voice, and waited for him to leave. I did not want to see anyone. I did not want to talk. To talk about it would be to make it real all over again, and I was already reliving that moment every time I closed my eyes. Clara's voice, the laughter, the necklace hitting the floor. I drank, I ordered takeout and let the containers pile up. I watched mindless television until my eyes burned. I was trying to numb myself to erase the last year of my life. But the memories were persistent. The good ones were the worst. Her smile when I gave her that necklace. The way she held my hand in the car. The quiet mornings in my small apartment, the one place I thought she felt truly herself. It was all a lie. I was a fool. A naive, trusting fool who had mistaken a predator's curiosity for affection. One night I finally hit the bottom. I was sitting on my floor surrounded by pizza boxes when I saw the box. It was a plain cardboard box in the corner of the room, filled with mementos from my relationship with Clara. Photos, ticket stubs, a dried rose from our first date. I had not had the strength to throw it out. Now, fueled by cheap whiskey and self-loathing, I decided it was time. I crawled over to it and dumped its contents onto the floor. I was going to burn it all. I sifted through the wreckage of our shared past. A photo of us at the beach, both of us smiling, looking genuinely happy. A playbill from a show we saw. And then at the bottom of the pile I found it. It was a USB drive, a sleek silver one. I did not recognize it. I had never seen it before. My curiosity, the first feeling other than despair I had felt in weeks, was piqued. I picked it up. It felt heavy in my hand, heavy with a significance I could not yet understand. I stumbled over to my desk, pushed aside a stack of takeout menus, and plugged the USB drive into my computer. The computer recognized the drive immediately. It was labeled Davenport Holdings Q3 Drafts. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was business stuff. Clara must have left it here by mistake. She sometimes worked from my apartment, complaining about the sterile atmosphere of her father's office. She must have forgotten it. My first instinct was to throw it away, to erase this last piece of her from my life. But another part of me, a colder, more methodical part, hesitated. I opened the drive. It contained dozens of files, spreadsheets, PowerPoint presentations, Word documents. Most of it was corporate jargon that meant nothing to me. Financial projections, marketing strategies, board meeting minutes. It was boring. I almost closed it all down. Then I saw a folder labeled Revisions Private. Private. The word snagged my attention. Inside that folder were several versions of a single quarterly report. I opened the most recent one, dated just a few weeks before the party. It was a standard financial statement, filled with charts and figures that painted a picture of a thriving, profitable company. Davenport Holdings was, by all accounts, a massive success. Then I opened an older version of the same report from a month earlier. I put the two documents side by side on my screen. At first they looked identical. The same layout, the same text, but I was a graphic designer. My entire career was built on noticing tiny details. I started comparing the numbers line by line. Most of them matched perfectly. But then I found it. A single line item under investment assets. In the older document, the value was listed at $50 million. In the final, polished version, that same line item was valued at $150 million. A $100 million difference. It was not a typo. It was a clean, round number. It was deliberate. I scrolled through the rest of the document. I found another discrepancy. A consulting fee paid to a company I had never heard of, Orion Group LLC. The fee was a staggering $15 million for a single quarter. I did a quick search for Orion Group LLC. There was no website, no public record, just a registration address. It was a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands. A chill went down my spine. This was not just a mistake. This was a lie. I was staring at a crack in the perfect, polished facade of the Davenport family. And in that moment, the despair that had been suffocating me for weeks began to burn away, replaced by something else. Something hot and sharp. It was rage, and it was giving me an idea. The USB drive became my obsession. The grief that had paralyzed me was replaced by a focused, electric energy. Sleep became a nuisance. Food was fuel. My apartment, once a tomb of despair, transformed into a command center. I bought a new whiteboard and a corkboard. I reactivated my high-speed internet. The designer who had been meticulously crafting logos and websites was now meticulously deconstructing a corporate empire. I spent days, then weeks, immersed in the digital ghost of Davenport Holdings. I taught myself the basics of forensic accounting through online tutorials and articles. I learned the language of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and asset inflation. The world of high finance was a world of smoke and mirrors, and I realized my skills as a designer gave me a unique advantage. I could see the patterns. I could see the manipulation. I was trained to create illusions. Now, I was learning how to dismantle one. The picture that emerged was uglier than I could have imagined. Davenport Holdings was not a thriving company. It was a house of cards. The core business, luxury real estate development, was failing. For years, Mr. Davenport had been propping up the company's value by massively inflating the worth of unsold properties and funneling money through a web of shell corporations, like the mysterious Orion Group. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, creating a fiction of immense wealth to attract new investors, whose money he then used to pay off old debts and maintain his family's extravagant lifestyle. It was a classic Ponzi scheme, dressed up in a tailored suit. Clara's betrayal had been about money. She had not left me because I was not good enough. She had left me because I was not rich enough to be a part of their lie. They were not wealthy. They were criminals, desperately trying to stay one step ahead of a collapse. My humiliation was not just cruelty. It was a business decision. I was a liability they could no longer afford. The knowledge did not bring me peace. It brought me clarity, a cold, hard clarity. Going to the authorities was an option. An anonymous tip to the SEC would bring their world crashing down, but that felt too simple, too clean. They had executed me in a public forum in front of their peers. A quiet legal proceeding behind closed doors was not justice. It was a transaction. I wanted them to feel what I felt, the powerlessness, the public shame. The feeling of having your entire world dismantled in front of an audience. I would not be a whistleblower. I would be the architect of their ruin. On my whiteboard in neat black letters I wrote down a date, October 31st. 1 year from now. Their downfall would be my masterpiece. My revenge could not be a single, explosive event. That would be too quick. I wanted to corrode their world from the inside out. I wanted them to become consumed by paranoia and suspicion long before the final blow fell. My first target was their social standing. The Davenports' power was built on a perception of untouchable success. I needed to tarnish that perception. I started small. I created a series of anonymous, encrypted email accounts and a fake persona. Avery. Avery was a disgruntled former employee of one of the Davenports' rival firms. This gave me a plausible reason for having insider knowledge without implicating myself. My first move was to target the local high society gossip columnist, a woman named Beatrice Vance, whose weekly newsletter was the Bible of the city's elite. I crafted an email to Beatrice. It was short, cryptic, and filled with just enough verifiable detail to be irresistible. I hinted at a cash flow problem at Davenport Holdings, mentioning a specific construction project that I knew from the files was months behind schedule and massively over budget. I did not provide hard evidence. I just planted a seed. Ask around about the contractors at the Azure Point development, I wrote. They haven't been paid in 3 months. Surprising for a company as successful as Davenport. I sent the email and waited. 3 days later, Beatrice's newsletter came out. Buried in the middle of a column about a charity gala was a single, devastating sentence. Whispers are swirling around Davenport Holdings. One wonders if their ambitious Azure Point project is proving to be more of a financial drain than a flagship development. A few unpaid contractors are certainly starting to talk. It was a masterpiece of innuendo. It accused them of nothing directly, but it raised the question. It created a crack in their armor. I imagined the phone calls Mr. Davenport would be making, the panicked reassurances he would have to give his investors. The seed was planted. Over the next few months, I continued to feed Beatrice and other local financial bloggers tiny, damaging morsels of information. A delayed permit, a supplier lawsuit, a key executive quietly resigning. Each leak was a small paper cut, insignificant on its own, but together, they were causing the Davenports to bleed credibility. They had no idea where the information was coming from, and I could almost feel their paranoia growing from across the city. Clara's friends were an extension of her. They were shallow, materialistic, and intensely competitive. Their loyalty was to status, not to each other. I knew that if I could create a rift between Clara and her closest friend, a woman named Madison, the social rot would spread quickly. From Clara's old emails, which were still accessible through a shared cloud account she had forgotten about, I knew that Madison was secretly jealous of Clara's engagement. I also knew that Madison's father was a direct competitor of Mr. Davenport. They were friendly rivals, but the competition was fierce. This was my opening. Using my Avery persona, I created a new line of attack. I started an anonymous, high-end real estate blog. I spent weeks designing it, filling it with plausible articles and market analysis to make it look legitimate. Then I wrote my key article. It was titled, "The King is Stumbling. Is Davenport Losing His Grip on the Luxury Market?" The article was a careful dissection of Davenport Holdings' recent struggles, using the information I had already leaked, but this time I added a new twist. I included quotes attributed to an anonymous industry insider. praising Madison's father's company for its shrewd and stable business practices, positioning him as the smart, reliable alternative to the increasingly erratic Mr. Davenport. I then used a targeted social media ad campaign, spending a few $100s to ensure the article appeared in the feeds of everyone connected to the Davenport and Madison families. I sent the link directly to Beatrice Vance. The effect was immediate. The article spread through their social circle like wildfire. I could picture the scene perfectly. Madison publicly would defend Clara. Privately, she would be delighted. Her father was being praised at the expense of his rival. Clara, on the other hand, would be furious. Her world was built on being number one, being portrayed as part of a failing dynasty while her best friend's family was celebrated would be an unbearable insult. The trust between them would curdle into suspicion. Clara would wonder, did Madison's family plant this story? Their friendship, a hollow thing to begin with, would begin to fracture under the pressure. I was not just attacking their business. I was turning their own people against them. The next phase of my plan required me to move from external attacks to internal ones. I needed to make the Davenports feel unsafe in their own company. I needed them to feel watched. During her time working from my apartment, Clara had often logged into her company's internal server. Like many people, she used the same simple password for almost everything. It was a combination of her pet's name and her birth year. It was laughably insecure. I tried it. I was in. I was not a hacker. I had no interest in stealing money or causing catastrophic data loss. That would be too crude and too traceable. My goal was psychological. I wanted to be a ghost in their machine. I spent a week just observing. I watched their internal emails, their project management software, their calendars. I learned the rhythms of their business, the names of their employees, the fault lines of their corporate culture. My first move was subtle. Mr. Davenport was a notorious micromanager. He demanded to be copied on every important email chain. I found a critical email thread discussing the financing for a new project. Late one night, I logged in as a junior accountant and simply removed Mr. Davenport from the list of recipients on a single reply. The next morning, I watched the chaos unfold. Mr. Davenport, realizing he had missed a key update, flew into a rage. He accused his senior staff of trying to cut him out of the loop. They, in turn, were baffled. They knew they had included him. The junior accountant was called into his office and torn to shreds, swearing up and down that he had not touched the recipient list. An IT team was called in. They found no evidence of a breach. It was a ghost, a glitch. It created an atmosphere of mistrust and incompetence. I repeated this tactic in different ways over the next few months. I would slightly alter the time of a calendar invitation, causing an executive to show up late for a crucial meeting with investors. I would accidentally delete a single, important slide from a presentation just minutes before it was due to be given. I would change a number on an internal budget draft from a 3 to an 8, causing hours of panicked work to find the error. Each act was small enough to be plausible deniability. It could be human error. It could be a technical glitch. But the cumulative effect was profound. The well-oiled machine of Davenport Holdings was beginning to sputter and seize. People were blaming each other. Morale plummeted. Mr. Davenport, a man who craved absolute control, was losing control of his own company, and he had no one to blame but the phantoms in his own system. Paranoia and social shame were good appetizers. The main course was financial ruin. I needed to hit the Davenports where they lived, their wallet. My goal was not to steal from them but to make their investors flee. An anonymous tip to the SEC was still my trump card, but I was saving it for the grand finale. First, I needed to engineer a crisis of confidence. I focused on their keystone investors, a small group of wealthy families who had poured millions into Davenport's ventures. Through my access to their server, I identified the most nervous of the bunch, a man named Marcus Thorne. His portfolio was heavily exposed to Davenport Holdings. If he pulled out, others might follow. I created another persona, the Sentinel, a supposed financial analyst specializing in corporate risk. I built a sophisticated, data-heavy website under this name, filled with complex charts and dense articles about market trends. It looked professional. It looked authoritative. Then I published my magnum opus, a deep-dive analysis of the luxury real estate market. The report was 90% legitimate analysis. I paid for real market data to make it credible, but buried deep within its pages was a section dedicated to over-leveraged regional developers. I never mentioned Davenport Holdings by name. I did not have to. I described their business model with surgical precision. I detailed a hypothetical company with inflated asset valuations, a dangerously high debt-to-equity ratio, and an unhealthy reliance on new investment to cover existing liabilities. I used the exact, to-the-dollar figures I had found on the USB drive. To a casual reader, it would mean nothing. To Marcus Thorne, it would be like reading his own private financial nightmare. To ensure he saw it, I did not just send him a link. That would be too obvious. Instead, I found a financial forum he frequented and started a discussion about the report, mentioning how its analysis was particularly relevant to companies like his. I knew his ego and his anxiety would compel him to read it. 2 weeks later, the tremors started. I saw it in the internal emails. Marcus Thorne requested an emergency meeting with Mr. Davenport. He was asking pointed questions. He wanted an independent audit of the Azure Point project. Davenport blustered and reassured him, but the damage was done. Thorne was spooked. He began quietly liquidating his position. His exit was not a flood, but a steady, persistent drain. And where one nervous investor leads, others soon follow. The financial bleed had begun. Months flew by in a haze of cold focus. The autumn leaves began to turn and the air grew crisp. It was almost time. The Davenports, weakened and paranoid, were behaving exactly as I had predicted. To combat the negative rumors and project an image of unshakable confidence, they announced they would be hosting their annual Halloween gala. It was their signature event, a symbol of their power and influence. This year, they were promising it would be the most extravagant party the city had ever seen. It was a desperate, arrogant gamble. It was also the perfect stage for my final act. I needed to be there. Getting an invitation was impossible, so I had to find another way in. The party was a massive undertaking, requiring dozens of outside vendors, caterers, lighting technicians, security guards, musicians. This was my way in. I focused on the event staff. The company providing the waiters and bartenders was a high-end agency called Prestige Events. I spent a week researching them. I found their online training manuals, their uniform requirements, their hearing protocols. Then I created a fake identity. I became Mark Collier. I built a plausible work history, complete with a fake LinkedIn profile and references from restaurants that had gone out of business. I used my design skills to create a flawless, forged food handler's license and a state ID. I did not apply for a job directly. Instead, I watched their job postings. A week before the party, a call went out for temporary staff to handle a large, confidential event. I knew this was it. I submitted my application as Mark Collier. I was gambling that in the rush to staff such a massive party, their background check would be superficial. I was right. 2 days later, I received an email. I was hired. I was to report to the Davenport estate at 4 p.m. on October 31st. I was on the list. I would be serving them drinks as their world burned down around them. The irony was exquisite. My costume was already prepared. I would be wearing the simple black and white uniform of the catering staff. It was the best disguise imaginable. In a room full of people desperate to be seen, I would be invisible. I was the help. No one looks at the help. They would look right through me, never suspecting that the man pouring their champagne was the same man who had spent a year meticulously plotting their demise. With my entry secured, I prepared the final pieces of my plan. This had to be more than just a financial exposé. It had to be a personal, public humiliation, mirroring what they had done to me. I had 2 main weapons prepared. The first was the information itself. I had compiled all my findings into a single, devastating package on a new USB drive. This one was encrypted and password protected. It contained the original and altered financial reports, a detailed flowchart of the shell corporations, copies of incriminating internal emails, and a meticulously researched report that explained the fraud in simple, easy-to-understand terms. It was a digital guillotine. This package was for the authorities and the media. But dropping it anonymously was not enough. I needed to deliver it with maximum impact. I identified my targets at the party: a well-known investigative journalist from a national newspaper and a senior agent from the FBI's white-collar crime division. I had learned through my research that both were on the guest list. Mr. Davenport liked to keep his powerful acquaintances close. I would find a way to get the information into their hands during the chaos. The second weapon was more personal. It was psychological. I wanted to break Clara. I wanted her to understand in a visceral way the pain she had caused. I went back to that box of mementos I had failed to burn. I found the photos, the ticket stubs, the dried rose. I scanned them all in high definition. Then I did what I do best. I designed something. It was a short video, a 2-minute montage. It was our story. It started with the happy moments, us laughing at the beach, kissing under a street lamp, cooking in my small kitchen. The soundtrack was a soft, melancholy piano piece. Then halfway through, the music would cut abruptly. The image would freeze on my smiling face. Then the audio would kick in. It was a recording. A crystal-clear recording from my phone, which I had forgotten was recording in my pocket that night, of Clara's speech at the party. "Leo has been a project," her voice would say, cold and cruel, echoing over the silent images of our past. The video would end with the sound of the necklace hitting the marble floor, then fade to black. I loaded the video onto a dozen small, cheap MP4 players. I had a plan for how to distribute them at the party. It was cruel. It was vindictive. It was exactly what she deserved. The financial ruin was for her father. The video was for her. I arrived at the Davenport estate through the service entrance. The contrast with my last visit was stark. There was no valet, no red carpet, just a gravel path leading to the chaotic backstage world of a massive event. I was handed a crisp white shirt, a black bow tie, and an apron. I changed in a crowded tent with 50 other temporary workers. No one gave me a second glance. I was Mark Collier, the anonymous waiter. Walking into the grand ballroom was a surreal experience. It was the same room where my life had been torn apart, but now it was transformed into a Venetian masquerade. Guests in elaborate masks and period costumes drifted through the crowd. The air hummed with music and conversation. The Davenports had spared no expense. They were putting on a brave, defiant face for the world. Mr. Davenport stood near the entrance, dressed as a king, his mask adorned with gold filigree. He was laughing, shaking hands, the picture of a man without a care in the world. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted around the room. Clara was dressed as a Venetian princess, her gown a confection of satin and lace. Her mask covered her eyes, but I could see the brittle smile on her lips. They were performers on a sinking stage. My job was simple. I took a tray of champagne flutes and began to circulate. My heart was a cold, steady drum in my chest. There was no fear, no nervousness, only a profound, chilling sense of purpose. I moved through the clusters of guests, my eyes scanning for my targets. I spotted the journalist, Sarah Connell, near the orchestra. I saw the FBI agent, Agent Miller, talking to a city councilman. I kept my head down. I refilled glasses. I offered canapés. I was a ghost. At one point, I walked directly past Clara. She was talking to Madison, their friendship apparently repaired for the sake of public appearance. She did not even see me. I was just part of the furniture. The man whose heart she had broken, the man who was about to end her world, was standing 2 feet away from her, and she had no idea. The feeling was intoxicating. Power, I realized, was not about having the most money or the biggest house. It was about knowing things that other people did not. And I knew everything. My first move was to deploy the video players. The party was in full swing. The guests were loud, lubricated with expensive champagne, and distracted by the spectacle. On the tables scattered around the ballroom were elaborate floral centerpieces and bowls of party favors, small, velvet pouches filled with chocolates. It was the perfect hiding place. Moving with quiet efficiency, I slipped one of the small MP4 players into a pouch on each of the main tables. I left one on a chair in the powder room. I tucked another behind a book in the library. I wanted them to be discovered organically, like strange, secret artifacts. The first discovery happened about an hour into the party. I was clearing plates from a table near the back when I heard a woman gasp. "What on earth is this?" she said. She was holding one of the small black players. Her friends gathered around her, curious. She fumbled with the buttons and the screen flickered to life. The happy images of me and Clara filled the small screen. The women leaned in, confused. "Is that Clara?" one of them whispered. Then the music stopped. Clara's recorded voice, tinny but clear, filled the small pocket of air around the table. "Leo has been a project, a fun little experiment." The woman dropped the player as if it were hot. The chatter at the table stopped cold. They looked over at Clara, who was laughing across the room, oblivious. Then they looked at each other. The seed of scandal had sprouted. A few minutes later, another player was found. Then another. A quiet, toxic murmur began to spread through the room. People were whispering behind their masks. They were stealing glances at a confused Clara. The atmosphere began to shift from festive to tense. The air grew thick with unspoken questions. What was this video? Who was Leo? Clara's perfect party was being poisoned, and she did not even know it yet. While the social poison did its work, I focused on my primary targets. Sarah Connell, the journalist, was a pro. She sensed the shift in the room's atmosphere and was watching the unfolding drama with a keen, analytical eye. Agent Miller, the FBI agent, seemed more detached, but he too had noticed that something was amiss. This was my moment. I approached Sarah's table with a bottle of champagne. "More champagne, ma'am?" I asked, my voice neutral. As I leaned in to pour, I spoke in a low, urgent whisper. "My name isn't Mark. There's a story here, a real one. Davenport Holdings is a house of cards." Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, met mine. She did not flinch. "Who are you?" she murmured, her lips barely moving. "Someone who knows where the bodies are buried," I replied. "Check the velvet pouch on the chair by the terrace doors. Everything you need is on the drive inside. Password is Project Leo." I straightened up, nodded politely, and moved away before she could ask another question. I saw her glance towards the terrace doors, her professional curiosity fully ignited. Next was Agent Miller. This required a different approach. I could not be as direct. I waited until he was alone for a moment near one of the bars. I approached as if to clear his empty glass. As I reached for it, I accidentally knocked a small, folded napkin onto his lap. "Terribly sorry, sir," I said, my voice full of apology. He waved it off. "No problem." He picked up the napkin to hand it back to me, but I was already gone, disappearing into the crowd. I knew he would open it. It is human nature. Inside the napkin was a small, encrypted USB drive identical to the one I had left for the journalist. Scrawled on the napkin in neat block letters were the words, "Orion Group LLC, CAYMANISLANDS. You know what to do." It was just enough to trigger a professional inquiry. It was a lead, dropped anonymously at a society gala. He would have no choice but to follow up. The two most powerful weapons in the room were no longer the Davenport's money or influence. They were the two small USB drives I had just deployed. The dominoes were now set. All that was left was to push the first one. Clara finally saw one of the videos. A guest, either out of malice or cluelessness, brought one of the players to her and asked, "Clara, darling, can you explain this? It seems to be you." I watched from across the room as she took the small device. I saw the confusion on her face as she saw the images of us. Then I saw the dawning horror as her own voice echoed back at her. The color drained from her face. Her perfect smile dissolved. She looked around the room, and for the first time she noticed the whispers, the strange looks, the guests huddled together, watching her. She saw Madison staring at her with an expression that was not friendship, but a kind of fascinated pity. The mask she was wearing could not hide the panic in her eyes. She looked for her father. Mr. Davenport was already striding towards her. His face a thundercloud. He had been alerted that something was deeply wrong. He grabbed the player from her hand, listened for a second, and his face contorted with rage. "Who did this?" he hissed, his voice a low growl. This was my cue. It was time for the grand finale. The party had a centerpiece, a massive projection screen behind the orchestra that was looping artistic images of Venetian masks. It was connected to a laptop controlled by the event's AV technician. I had scoped out his station earlier. He was a young kid, bored and more interested in his phone than his job. I walked calmly to the AV booth. "Hey," I said, holding up a small tray with a bottle of water and a sandwich. "Prestige sent this over for you, long night." The kid's eyes lit up. "Oh, thanks, man," he said. "I'm starving." As he reached for the food, I had the split second I needed. I had a tiny USB stick in my palm. It was a keylogger I had programmed myself. I quickly plugged it into the back of his laptop and pulled it out. It took less than a second. The device captured his login password. I waited 5 minutes. Then, from a hidden corner, I used my phone to remotely access his laptop. His password worked. I now had control of the massive screen that dominated the entire ballroom. The trap was set. Mr. Davenport was on stage now. He had taken the microphone from the orchestra leader. "A momentary disruption," he said, trying to project calm, but his voice was strained. "A pathetic, childish prank by some jealous individual." He was trying to regain control of the narrative, to dismiss the videos as a meaningless stunt. As he spoke, I made my move. On the giant screen behind him, the looping images of Venetian masks flickered and died. The screen went black for a second, plunging the stage into momentary darkness. The crowd gasped. Then a new image appeared. It was a high-resolution scan of the altered Q3 financial report from Davenport Holdings. An arrow, drawn in stark red, pointed to the inflated $100 million asset line. The room fell into a stunned silence. Mr. Davenport faltered, turning to see what everyone was staring at. He saw the document, his own lie projected 10 feet high for all his friends and investors to see. His face went pale. Then the screen changed again. It showed the flowchart I had created, the web of shell corporations, with Orion Group LLC right at the center, connected by red lines to an account in the Cayman Islands. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. These were not pranks. These were documents. This was evidence. I saw Agent Miller, no longer looking detached, push his way through the crowd towards the stage. I saw Sarah Connell, the journalist, her phone out, recording everything. The final image appeared on the screen. It was not a document. It was a simple, elegant text I had designed. It read, "A fun little experiment from a project you could no longer afford." And below it, in a clean, minimalist font, were 2 words, Project Leo. A new wave of whispers erupted, but this time they were not confused. They were electric with understanding. "Leo," they said. "It's the man from the video." Mr. Davenport stood frozen on the stage, exposed. Clara, near the front, stared at the screen, her mouth open in a silent scream. She finally understood. This entire night, this entire year of whispers and bad luck, it all led back to me. The man she had thrown away had come back to burn her kingdom to the ground. Chaos erupted. Mr. Davenport stood on the stage, speechless, as Agent Miller and 2 other men in dark suits calmly walked up the steps. Miller spoke quietly to him, but the message was clear. It was over. The king had been dethroned in his own court. As they escorted a stunned Davenport off the stage, the guests began to stream towards the exits. The party was over. The Davenport era was over. I watched from the shadows, my heart pounding, not with excitement but with a strange, hollow emptiness. I saw Clara. She was not crying. She was just standing there, her princess costume looking ridiculous in the harsh light, staring at the empty stage. Her mask had fallen to the floor. Her face was blank with shock. She looked small and pathetic. There was no triumph in seeing her like this. There was only a quiet, bitter finality. I slipped out the same way I came in, through the service entrance. I took off the uniform, dumping it in a trash bin a block away. I walked through the cool night air, just another man on the street. No one would ever know it was me. Mark Collier would cease to exist. Leo, the architect of ruin, would disappear. In the days that followed, the story was everywhere. Davenport Empire, a house of cards. Society kingpin arrested for massive fraud. The details I had leaked were now front-page news. Sarah Connell's articles, citing documents received from a confidential source, won awards. The SEC launched a full-scale investigation. The Davenport assets were frozen. The mansion was seized. They lost everything. Their friends, the same ones who had laughed at my humiliation, abandoned them instantly. They were social pariahs. I followed the news with a clinical detachment. I saw pictures of Clara leaving a courthouse, her face hidden from the cameras. She looked tired and broken. I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just quiet. The fire of my rage, which had burned so hot for a year, had finally gone out, and all that was left were the ashes. Months passed. Winter turned to spring. The Davenport scandal faded from the headlines, replaced by new dramas, new rises and falls. I rebuilt my life. I had quit my old job and started my own small design firm. My work was good, and my business grew slowly but steadily. I lived in the same apartment, but it no longer felt like a prison. It was just a place to live. One afternoon, I was walking through a park when I saw her. It was Clara. I almost did not recognize her. She was not wearing designer clothes. She was in simple jeans and a sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was working at a small coffee kiosk, wiping down the counter. She saw me. Her eyes widened, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the old fear. I kept walking, intending to pass by without a word, but she called out my name. Leo. Her voice was quiet, hesitant. I stopped. I turned to face her. "What do you want, Clara?" I asked. My voice was not angry, it was just tired. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry," she said, not looking at me, focusing on a spot on the counter. "For what I did to you. It was a horrible thing to do." "Yes, it was," I said. She finally looked up at me. Her eyes were clear, the arrogance was gone. "Did you do it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "All of it." I held her gaze. I could have lied, I could have denied everything, but I was done with lies. "Yes," I said. She nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. She was not crying for her lost fortune. I think she was crying for the person she had been. "I think, a part of me always knew," she said. "You were always smarter than any of us." She wiped the tear away with the back of her hand. "You won." "There were no winners, Clara," I said. "We all just lost." I turned and walked away, and this time she did not call me back. I did not look back. There was nothing left to see. I never told anyone what I did, not even Ethan. It was a weight I carried alone. The revenge was a masterpiece of planning and execution. It achieved everything I wanted it to. It brought justice. It brought ruin. But it did not bring me peace. Peace came later. It came slowly, in small, quiet moments. It came from the satisfaction of building my own business on my own terms. It came from reconnecting with old friends. It came from finding joy in simple things again. A well-designed logo, a walk in the park on a sunny day, a cup of coffee at a quiet cafe. The moral of the story is not that revenge is sweet. It is not. It is a bitter, corrosive thing that hollows you out, even when you succeed. The real victory was not the night their world came crashing down. The real victory came the day I realized I had stopped thinking about them. The day I woke up and the first thing on my mind was not the past but the future. They built their lives on a foundation of lies and arrogance. I built mine on a foundation of vengeance. Both were unsustainable. In the end, I had to walk away from my own creation, my perfect, terrible revenge to find something real. I had to forgive myself for becoming a monster to fight monsters. My revenge gave me justice, but building a quiet, honest life for myself that gave me freedom. The desire for justice after a deep betrayal is one of the most powerful human emotions. But the path to getting that justice can change you in ways you never expect. It forces you to ask difficult questions about where you draw the line. Have you ever had to walk away from a fight, not because you lost, but because you were afraid of what winning would turn you into? Share your experience in the comments below.